The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group. If you or anyone you know might be interested in making a television show, please call 260-421-1250. Access Fort Wayne is a department of the Allen County Public Library.
Everybody, I'm Terry Doran. We had a very special show here with Congressman Mark Souder, who's now an author of a really terrific book called Television in Fort Wayne, 1953 to 2018. And one of the anchor people, one of the TV people from Fort Wayne that Mark profiles in the book, one of many, is Marti Wright. I used to watch Marty on Channel 21, and we have some things in common. And Patty Hunter is the producer-host of Patty's Page. And Mark was kind enough to include in his book a section on public access and Theater for Ideas, a show I do, and Patty's Page, and several other producers at Access, but many, many commercial television personality. So with that, welcome Mark, welcome Marty, welcome Patty. Mark, why don't we start with how this idea came, how a congressman wrote a book about television in Fort Wayne.
Well, I love history and have consumed books from the time I was a kid. I actually had a journalism graduate school scholarship, but decided instead to get an MBA from Notre Dame because I didn't think there was any money in journalism. And so that was long before we had the furniture store. And that was my early background. But as I ran into a couple of things that prompted my thinking about this long term was when they changed the congressional district, and all of a sudden 1/3 of my congressional district was based in South Bend and Elkhart television market. And a couple of things happened. One is here I had marketed my ties to Grable, the Amish, the country image, and when I went up there we put some billboards in Elkhart County that had a barn on it. And when I checked in overnight to do South Bend television the next morning at the Diocesan House, the girl said, "Well, your name's the same one as on that billboard." I said, "Well, I'm your congressman." She said, "Well, I thought that was an ad for Amish Acres." And I realized they knew nothing about Grable. They knew nothing about Souders. Much like one time I was on there, this was way back when the Colts and the Bears were playing in the Super Bowl, and I said, "Go Colts." And after we got off the air on WNDU, the host, Tricia Sloman, told me, "That was gutsy." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Everybody here's a Bears fan. They don't like the Colts. That's way down south." And I should have known that. My wife's from South Bend. I went to Notre Dame. But you know, you get so caught up in your own media market that you don't realize that we have different radio stations. We have different high school basketball scores that we watch. We don't follow the same tornado tracks. We don't follow the same rainstorms, snowstorms. We don't know the downtown Robertsons, unless you have relatives in South Bend, you wouldn't know Robertsons was their version of W&D's. That we know more about Los Angeles and New York than we do after our golden zone drops off, and radio and newspaper are generally within that golden zone. So really, unless you experience something on TV, it's like a tree falls in a forest. If no one is there, did it make a noise? Because something reverberates off your ear. So I thought with TV going from the 50s to the 60s, where in early 70s when it had its peak, the highest viewed percentage show in history is Neil Armstrong on the moon. And the shows in the 50s, when there were just 3 stations, and into the 60s had huge penetrations. We all watched the same thing because we didn't have any other choices. And so we had a commonality. And as cable came in, as all of the sources multiplied for our freedom, we have less commonality of information. And as television, traditional network television, goes to where everybody's on these, you have 18 million things, you see kind of a bell curve of the importance of television. And I thought, this is a good time to capture it because it's disintegrating. Local television news and programming has declined 3 years in a row by 18% each year. That's dramatic in the last 3 years. So in trying to do this book, I thought, okay, I've done advertising through our store. I ran our store advertising. I was founded the publicity for the Grapeville Country Fair and the promotion with that. I was on Coats and Quails advertising committees as well as Ross Adair's. In my own campaigns, I spent almost $2 million just in the South Bend market. So I'm certainly one of the biggest advertisers between politics and our business that's been in Fort Wayne, a locally firm. And then secondly, ever since I was a rowdy kid, I was on local TV from IPFW to the, through my years in politics, I was on all the time. And then I was also Wayne's political commentary during the 2012 election. So I did it from the other side of the camera. So I've been covered, I advertised and so on, and I knew most of the people personally, back to Reed Chapman and Hilliard Gates and Ed Metcalf and so on. So I was a good person to do the research, and I love to write. That's basically what I do now is write, although I've been focusing on baseball and politics. And then I thought, to do this, I really need to work with some people who can open the doors in the television community and who were the two most watched anchors because they did more newscasts. Melissa and Heather were on longer as a primary anchor on the top two stations. So I went to them, outlined the concept of how to lay this out like a TV broadcast. The first years would be chronological. The last half would be just like a newscast. First 7 minutes, weather, sports, soft news. Then we do politics and ads. And so the framework of that book was there. The second part of that was about 1.5 years in, it didn't work because amazingly, nobody kept any records. There's no personnel records at any of the stations. They've transferred ownership too many times. Whoever buys the station takes it and throws it away. The early video, according to Dick Floria, the only thing that was left was some from NBC. It's down at the Indiana Historical Society. I have no equipment to watch it. And so he said, it's worthless, it might as well be thrown out. The videotape era, the 21 and 33 and 15 all got rid of their videotapes. They're repetitive. So I found a few through the History Center and a couple other places, but they're virtually worthless. Furthermore, we chose a publisher that's a high-quality publisher, and taking screenshots or many of the photographs were not high enough quality to reprint in from a true historical book. This company did the Baker Street Station book. They did our 2-volume history, but they do them for the New York Police Department, Los Angeles Fire Department, San Francisco, all over the country, and they had requirements. So we had to reboot the book. And through it, it's now told through stories by going to people like Marti Wright with her collection, by others. Bill Nichols was a lifesaver because he was at the first station, 33 from 56 to 86, and he had 300 photos with which to choose from. And so we had to recreate this, but basically that's the story of how it came to be there and how we did it.
Well, thank you. Bill Nichols, by the way, directed a lot of my shows in 1981 when public access started. Came down and as a volunteer and directed, and the very first show was January 9, 1981. So we're going to show a few clips of television shows here. But first I'm going to ask Marty, what did you think when Mark approached you to be in this book? Was it out of the blue, sort of? Like, okay, go ahead.
So I was telling this story the other night to, actually to Mike Littlejohn. I was in St. Louis. This was in March of 2017, right?
I don't remember, I'm old.
Yeah, well, and let me say before I answer that question, this book is amazing, okay? regardless of me in it or not, it doesn't matter. I'd buy the book anyway. This is historical, it's beautiful, and it is just a lovely book that everyone needs.
Yeah, and what impressed me was, it's more than television, because I was reading about you in the book today, Marty. There's a lot about civil rights. There's a lot of social issue is covered in the book. It's not just, oh, Marti Wright did this, Heather Herron did that.
It's a great,
put in a context.
great
Like your
historical.
career was heavily involved with integration and Central High School, the shooting of Vernon Jordan. You covered the trial of Vernon Jordan, was a famous civil rights activist, and was shot here in Fort Wayne, and gave Fort Wayne national attention, good or bad. And so, what were some of your highlights during that time, Marty?
Okay, so let's start with your first question. I just want to make sure.
Sure.
So, it was March of 2017. I was in St. Louis at the SEC basketball tournament because my nephew was playing in the tournament for Vanderbilt. I was with Camille Whitworth. We were walking around areas of St. Louis with her father, and all of a sudden my phone dings, and I'm looking and I'm reading, and I'm not getting it, and I'm, what? Book? Mark? What? I was shocked. I was shocked. Because, well, you just don't know what you're doing when you do it, okay? It was a job, it was a career, it was a great job, but, you know, based on how I was raised, probably how all of us were raised, you get a job, you do your job, and you just don't think about what's going to happen 30 years down the road, right? You just do your job, you get up every day and do your thing. So that's when Mark contacted me, and I'm sure it was shortly thereafter that I came to Fort Wayne to meet Mark, and we talked for about 4 hours, the first one.
And we did a program here at Public Access.
Yes, yes, we sure
The
did.
series hasn't aired yet.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so now, highlights, I think, Terry, you hit them. I think the biggest thing that I would like to say to umbrella and envelop all of this, whether it was the desegregation of Fort Wayne Community Schools, whether it was a shooting of Vernon Jordan, whether it was President Reagan coming in and putting sandbags on the river when we were flooding, all of those things, the umbrella is trust. We built trust. We, and I'm saying we, not I, because it was a team. We built trust. We worked very, very diligently, very, very hard to do the very, very best job that we could in being accurate and telling people what was going on. And when I say telling, reporting, everybody else can make up their own decisions and own opinions. We were only just there to give you the facts, okay? And that's what we tried to do.
Did you do any reporting?
Pardon?
Did you do reporting? Were you a reporter?
I was a reporter before I was an anchor. You don't start as an anchor. Well, maybe you do now these days. I don't know. I was at WMEE, WQHK as a radio reporter for 1.5 years from March of 1980 to September of 1981 when I received the job at Channel 21. I went to Channel 21 as a reporter. You start entry level. Again, it may not be that way now, but you start entry level. And so I was a reporter, well, and it actually, Patty, and I need to say this, I was always a reporter. And Anchor's a reporter too. Again, maybe not these days, and if I'm showing bias, you can hear my bias about television news now. I was a reporter before I was an anchor, and I would always bill myself as a reporter. Just bill myself as a reporter. And one of the things that Mark highlighted in the book, and I want to say it because I believe it to my heart, I did get the job because I was black. I got the job because I was a black woman, okay? They were looking for a black woman. But I don't believe, I kept the job for 20 years because I was a black woman. I don't believe that Dr. Bill Anthus would meet with me and talk with me and feed me stories that maybe didn't air for another week because I was a black reporter. He trusted me. And I think there's other nuances there that Mark brought to light. But no, I still consider myself a journalist. I still do. And I've been at it for 21 years. It's your life. It's your life's work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you're more than a television personality, more than a television reporter. You're a journalist, whether you got a camera in your hand or on you, or you're telling stories. You're reading about you. You're very concerned about getting people's stories out, and I like that very much. You know, and you did a feature called The Good News with Marti Wright, and featured people, stories of.
And that was very important in a local venue, in a local perspective. When Don Bradley said, "Marty, we want you to do the good news," I said, "What's that?" Huh? And I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't quite sure. We were developing it. I think Don maybe had seen it in another market or something. But boy, did people latch on. I really didn't have to come up with much myself. People would call, they'd write, they'd email. It was locally driven. It was citizen driven. The Good News was citizen driven. I just got to be the one to report it.
The challenge in a book like this is that covering 65 years of daily pounding with multiple shows and hundreds of people who've been anchors at morning, noon, and night, who do you pick to highlight? How do you pick which issues? Because I was trying to tell the comprehensive history of Fort Wayne as seen through TV. So the challenge of covering civil rights, which was a big thing in Fort Wayne, given the fact that a lot of this area is conservative Republican, like I am, wouldn't necessarily be seen as big civil rights advocates, of how to bring through the transition. That was amazing. We had colored TV before we had people of color anchoring the news. The question isn't, did she get the job because she was black? The question is, why did it take so long to get a black news anchor? Fran Grant had a show on 21 before that for a while during the day. There were others who were occasionally in the news, but we did not have Marti's history, and I ran into this constantly. She didn't necessarily want to be seen just as a black news person because she wasn't. She represented everybody. But her historic significance is she was the first in the evening news when 21 had emerged as a #1 station in Fort Wayne, and not only that, during that period of that she was there and just before, had become the #1 station network affiliate of any station in the country that was a network station. And Ed Metcalf took the chance to put an African American in the middle of that, in this, that African Americans were at that time, I think about, if I recall from the research, maybe 7% of Fort Wayne, but less than 2% of the TV market. So it was a pretty big political risk and financial risk for Ed to do that. So he had to take the first breakthrough people, have to have which Marti has in abundance, is enthusiasm. They have to be the type of person who can handle things like the integration of the schools, which was the kind of accomplishment when Martin Luther King was here. If you read about what he was talking about housing, which is directly related to the school integration. It was the defining thing of which the Ministerial Alliance, led by Reverend White, was pushing, and the schools became the symbol, and she worked with Dr. Anthus in doing that. Furthermore, Vernon Jordan was not the shooting was not a bright spot in our Fort Wayne history. It turned into that because of the way we handled it, and the guy was from Utah, not here. But it was initially not good, but she was involved in that as a black reporter covering this potentially explosive issue. And that's what I felt that the best way to bring the civil rights issue into the book and to work in the marches and so on was integration, and she was the great figure as the most historic person in that period. But she was also really popular. It didn't matter to most people that she was black. She was a popular news anchor, and you can still see that today.
Annie, you have a bit of a different perspective. You're a public access producer. One difference is you don't get paid. But you do a lot of the shows and topics that Mark and Marty are talking about. You do a lot of social issues. Tell us a little bit about Patty's Page.
Got a minute? I am TV producer, host of Patty's Page TV show. I've got almost about 600 shows under my belt. I'm into my 12th year of being online and on TV. I am on weekends, Saturday night and Sunday morning, every weekend. I've interviewed many leaders, Republican leaders, as well as pro-life leaders all over the world. And I also interviewed Dr. Rita King about 7 times over the years. And she's a very beautiful woman, and I love her. I'm behind her 100%.
You've also interviewed a lot of Fort Wayne television personalities.
Yes,
You've
I did.
interviewed Heather Herron. You've interviewed Melissa Long. You're going
Melissa
to
Long.
have Marti Wright on your show.
Marti Wright.
You had Mark Souder on your show. Who else?
I had you two, my co-hosts.
You had many others. Ted Lynn, that just retired not long ago, news director
On
of
Wayne TV.
Well, speaking of television, let's see a few clips here. I think I see Marti Wright up on the screen. So
Yes.
I have not seen this, so I'll be watching with you. I just prepared a couple, something from Patty's Page, something of Marty, and something from one of my shows.
Shall we?
Okay, let's talk about the media and what effect it has on the quality of life for blacks in Fort Wayne. What better person to talk about the media than Marti Wright, reporter at 21 Alive, Channel 21. Marty, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Let's just start off. What do you see the relationship between blacks and the media here in Fort Wayne?
The only relationship I see between blacks and the media is the relationship I see between the media and everyone. That being that we are supposed to be an objective group of people. We report news, we report what we consider as important to the community as a whole. We also do spend time, maybe not as much as we should in some opinions, concentrating on the black community or on the minority community. But I think that has a lot to do with the fact that Fort Wayne does not have a large black population or not have a large minority population. But we do try and reach all areas. We do try to fulfill a need. When I have anyone call the station and say, hey, why weren't you here, why weren't you there? More often than not, 99% of the time, it's because we didn't know about it.
Right.
We don't have ESP.
So, Heather, what is your title here in Sweetwater?
It's a fancy title, which means nothing, but I am the Vice President of Corporate Communications. So it means I oversee internal and external PR, and I also do all of our community outreach and philanthropy. So all of the charitable giving and all of the sponsorships and all of that help kind of oversee what we do in the community.
Okay, City Council is the legislative branch of the city of Fort Wayne. And so if you kind of go back to your high school and your civics classes, so the mayor is the executive branch, the city council is the legislative branch and the fiscal body. And so we are responsible for the finances of the city and laws, which we call local laws, which we call ordinances.
Rogers, Benson, Washington Week in Review, or the Friday Night Movie. This is Theater Fridays. Welcome, all of you. I'm Terry Doran to the premiere program of a 52-part series, New Television for a New Decade, and the debut of public access television in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
By the way, what I said was a little bit got cut off. That's the 1981 VHS tape. First words ever uttered on public access that got cut off were, "This is not the Incredible Hulk. This is not Washington Week in Review. This is not the Friday night movies." Those were all the network shows on Friday night at 8 o'clock. So I told Mark, I don't think the viewers confused me with the Incredible Hulk. But I thought it made a good opening. But anyway, congratulations to all three of you for enlightening us.
Can I talk just a minute about public access and why it's in the book?
Absolutely.
That I was involved first as a staffer with Eric Mulberg when I worked for Dan Coates, and then as a member, because I believe that I call public access to Terry and then in the book as the early YouTube, because anybody can go in and be on. It's a democratic institution, and that I believe for democracy, a republic, to function, that you need to have means of access. That's why I tended to back ESOPs and ownership and things like credit unions, in spite of the banks threatening to beat me, even though my grandpa was one of the founders of Grable Bank. That because when people are owning something or can participate, they're less likely to view it as a few powerful rich people running everything, and you give an outlet to it. It's the people's place. And that Terry was first up in New Haven, and then when Bonsip brought it to Fort Wayne, one of the early shows was, I was on Smokey Montgomery's show early on as a kid, and we had we did a show called The Conservative Alternative, where Don Schmidt, I organized it, and it was one of the early shows. There's no tape left but Jeff Turner was the host along with Don Schmidt. Jeff Turner's since been active with Metal Technologies and in developing Northeast Indiana. But so I believed in it as an institution, and I felt it should be included in the range of television options that provides a unique voice to people who often wouldn't have their views on traditional controlled free networks. Now even with internet you can do it, but it gives them access to traditional television outlets too. So the key debate when I came into Congress was whether we were going to continue to mandate to cities that they had to have public access channels in order to have a cable contract. And that was really touchy because there are so many other non-mandated video options that raise the cost related to cable. But I still think it's been a good decision. YouTube has since exploded the opportunities. So thank you for letting me explain why it's in the book and why I think it's an important part.
Well, thank you, Mark. You mentioned New Haven, John Bonza. We did a series of interviews, this was in the 70s, with political candidates. This is before you became a candidate for Congress, Mark. But I interviewed a young man that became pretty famous named Dan Quayle. And he was running for Congress, I think to replace Dan Coates. I don't know, I'm not sure I have that right. But anyway, I won a national award for that interview. So there's an overlap of, access, commercial, and so forth. And you saw Patty interviewing Heather Herron, who is one of the authors of Mark's book. And she was on Wayne TV for a long time as anchor, now at Sweetwater.
I also interviewed Melissa Long.
Go ahead, I'm sorry, what?
I also interviewed Melissa Long with Senator David, before you retired, of course. And the beautiful people.
Public access provides a unique voice. It certainly has voices that wouldn't appear on commercial television. So thank you for including us, Mark. It was very special, and I had never met Mark Souder, and I got a message on Facebook one day. You talk about you being surprised. I thought, what? What? It's not Congress. I can't be in trouble, can I? Well, what? So anyway, it was about, hey, you know, what's your background? How'd you start Theater for Ideas? And, you know, the rest is history, as they say. That started with shows in the 70s that went on John Bonds' station in New Haven called Citizen Cable, and that turned into public access television.
And Terry, no one does this.
Pardon?
No one does, well, I shouldn't speak for everyone. It's my belief that the wonderful work you do, the wonderful work that Mark has done, we don't go into it thinking, oh, goody, we're going to have a book in 30 years. We just do our job. I can't stress that enough, and I was with one of my former producers last night, and we were no one could touch Channel 21. We looked as good as Indianapolis, we looked as good as Chicago back in the 80s, and it was because we cared so much about the content, about people, about the community. No one got into this looking for a book. We did our job, okay? And we enjoyed our job. And hopefully, as Mark says, and thank you, hopefully that enthusiasm back then was genuine, because it was genuine to me. And I absolutely, like Mark, because he's a better writer than I am, but like Mark, I love to read and write. I still do. And it's the written word is going away, but it's so important. And that's the importance of this book. We can't forget. We can't forget.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's very well said.
I just wanted to thank Mark. I need to do this really quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
I interviewed Mark over the years when I was a reporter. He was one of my favorite subjects because of his knowledge on everything. I learned a lot, and I think that comes through as well. Well, you know, we didn't just put a microphone in front of somebody's face and have them talk without absorbing what they were saying. I learned so much, and I grew so much as a person because of the people I interviewed, I interviewed so many experts. So how could I not learn? How could I not learn? And so every day was a learning experience. Every day.
And you're still learning.
I'll be learning till the day I die.
Then afterwards, when you go to heaven, you still be learning.
And there you go.
I was going to say, with my show, I learned, I absorbed. I picked out the guests who were interesting or controversial. I had them tell the truth. I don't have them lie. I do not have a show that lies. If you had watched my show, but anyways, it's a good platform. TV is, as long as it's used for good and not for bad. And I think Marti has done an excellent job over the years while she was still at Channel 21.
So this is the deal, Patty. You don't know whether people are lying or not.
Well, if they lie, then
It's on them.
It's on them.
There you go.
I tried my best to lead a truthful show.
And that's what we're not, I'm generalizing, that's sometimes what we're not seeing in these days. It's blurred lines of journalism, journalist and editorialist, journalist and commentary. Those lines should not be blurred, ever. Ever.
Tell me about fake news.
Well, whoops.
Sometimes there's sloppy news.
Okay, sloppy, fake, whatever it is, it's junk, okay? It's junk if you don't get the interview from the person. You don't want to hear what I've got to say. You want to hear what Mark's got to say. You want to hear what the president has to say. You want to hear what the mayor has to say. There was one time on television, there's probably more than that, but the one that stands out is we were doing a story on churches, nonprofits, 501c3s, and I think we zeroed in on churches. I didn't do the story, but it was about the fact whether churches should be taxed. That was the basic story, okay? And so after the story's over, Marty almost got fired because I said on the air that I didn't think churches should be taxed. And my boss told me, Jack Maurer told me at that time, Marty, no one cares what you think. You're a reporter. Just report the facts and let people make their own decisions. That was a fireable offense. Okay? No joke. I could have gotten fired.
Is it difficult for you to withhold your own opinions?
No.
Thoughts?
Not after the fact that I almost got fired. But no, it never was. You report on a story, and you just report the story. And as I use this example all the time, if the story is about the color of the moon, either I have a scientist saying the moon is white, or blue or pink or whatever it is at a particular night, or I show a shot of the moon, okay? So it's not on me. I'm showing a shot of the moon, I'm interviewing a scientist who's telling me why the moon is whatever color it is. This is what I would tell school children when I would go to see children in school. All journalism is what the children were learning, what we learned in school. 4 W's and an H. Who, what, why, when, 5. Where, 5 W's, and how. That builds your story. That's it. You answer those questions, you got a story.
On the other hand, Marty is not necessarily typical even during her time era. That, and this has been a problem with television. My favorite story that I chose, I think at the end of the day I didn't use it in the book, was when I first got elected to Congress in 1994. It was a fairly contentious time. The Republicans had taken over, we were threatening to reduce spending, and we were getting pummeled in the media. And Steve Rogie from Wayne TV, after I did one of the press conference that was rather cerebral, explaining how things worked and budgets, he said, Mark, you guys are going to be hammered. Steve's dad had been a professor at Wabash, and he said, look, I actually agree with you. He said, but you're misunderstanding something. Now, one of the things I learned in the book was anchors are at the height of pay, and they may stay in the Fort Wayne market for a long time, but when they stay, or at least if they stay until they're removed rather than going on up, they occupy a seat that all the reporters coming in from universities and other markets, they can't get to. They're blocked at a relatively low salary level in this market. So they're looking where they're going to go next. And what Steve told me, he said, Mark, you can't do this with charts. Nobody wants to see a chart. They're showing, the other side that's criticizing you have people in the street saying Mark Souder's cutting the budget and they're going to be homeless. Mark Souder's changing school lunches to ketchup, not vegetables. Mark Souder is going to kick people out of hospitals because he's cutting hospital budgets. We were doing everything terrible. He said, their pictures are great. Your pictures are really lousy. Nobody wants to see your pictures. You got to think in terms of video. This is video. This isn't radio. This isn't newspaper. You've got to think in terms of video. And he said the second thing is, you got to think of me. I'm working here in Fort Wayne. I have no desire to stay in Fort Wayne. My goal is to get to Indianapolis, and then to a bigger city, and then to Washington. You've got to give me a story that gets me in the first 7 minutes. If Steve Rogie gets in the second 7 minutes, he's never going to get out of Fort Wayne. So you got to think, what is the person covering you seeking, and what are the people watching seeking? And they don't want some boring accountant telling them about the budget. That was a big lesson to me very early on. So we looked for pictures, and I had to think of who the media people were and what their goals were too. And if you do that, you'll be more successful. They weren't all necessarily all hunting for the who, what, whens, whys, and hows. They were looking how to get face time. And if you think it's just Fort Wayne, I remember one day coming off the floor,
one Washington Post reporter who I've become friends with, who's now a Bigfoot, she was new at that time, she said, Mark, can you tell me whether John Yang, who was their Bigfoot political reporter at the time, whether he's working on the same story I am? She said, and what questions he might have asked you, because in the Washington Post, the goal is to get on the front page. And they have their poster boards up, they're each pursuing stories. If they don't get on that front page, they're not going to get the big stories. They're not going to become a star who's going to be on ABC as well as in the Washington Post. It's part of the hard part of journalism. I chose to focus on positive parts, not a lot of the grittiness, but I learned that there's as much politics in television as there is in politics, and they fight just about as hard.
You're right. You're right. And I chose, and this is from Edwin C. Metcalf. I'll never forget him. I'll never forget him, and I'll love him forever. He said there's something to be said about being a big fish in a small pond. That's why I never left. I never had any desire to leave Fort Wayne. Maybe I should have. Maybe I don't know. I was very happy here. I was very happy here.
If you notice, the main people chosen in this book are people who chose to stay here at least a decade, preferably 2 decades, and they've shown in their community service that they've stayed involved, and they were involved in the community beyond just television. That's why they're featured.
That's absolutely right. We didn't just, look, there's nothing about this business that's 9 to 5. Nothing, right? About this business that's 9 to 5. During the snowstorm, was that 77? Snowstorm was 77? My husband, 78. Okay, and the flood is 79? No.
Flood was 78.
Okay, no. So I need to go forward a little bit because I was just getting out of college. So, what did you say?
I said the blizzard, the famous blizzard was 78.
Okay, so I'm not, what am I thinking?
83.
83, okay. So in 82, my husband made sure that we went out to dinner every night for 10 days because I was leaving the house at 5 o'clock in the morning, and who knew when I was coming home? So he said, I got to take her out to eat or I won't eat. You know, so, and that's just making the point about the fact that this is not a 9 to 5 job. You do what you have to do when you have to do it. And oh yeah, by the way, this school calls and wants you to talk to their kindergartners. And this organization, the Rotary Club wants you to speak. And this and that and the other. And it's just, you know,
Non-stop.
and you gotta love it or you're not gonna be able to do a good job at it.
There's a story in here on the blizzard that with Steve, this is for the show we did, and I got a lot of the information off that and put it in the book, and then we wanted to have a video archive too. But Steve Corona was interviewing Art Salzberg and Jack Maurer. Jack was in charge of the news department at WME, which had the second biggest news department. Art was in radio, and Art was at WOWO, and Steve was the news director at Channel 15 during the blizzard hit. And when the blizzard hit, they all needed to get to their posts, and that Art stayed at a motel downtown and went to the old WOWO station. He was the only person there. He had to walk down the street because he couldn't go anywhere, but had to keep WOWO on the air. And Jack lived close to he said the main broadcasting news area was, I don't know if it was the city council building, but it was around the courthouse somewhere. So he had to walk from the south side of Fort Wayne to there to make sure me could stay on the air. Steve Corona panicked because he was at home and his wife was pregnant and due. And so he didn't want to leave her alone at home. So they commandeered, some guy had an old big Cadillac, and but they couldn't get all the way to Wayne TV. So somewhere around, my presumption was before they got to Dana, somewhere in that part of State Street, he got out and his pregnant wife walked with him to the station, and they proceeded to be trapped there. Fortunately, the baby didn't come till after that, but they were there like 3 days at the station. So, you know, that you don't think about what's on the air and how are they staying on the air. But we have some great stories, and the story about the blizzard is told by a lot of the people who were trying to keep the stations on the air in that period.
Very commendable. I'd like to know who else have you in that book, my friend? And
Cologne?
Cologne? And Cologne.
You want to know who some of the people are in the book?
Other people.
Yeah, we picked there were multiple criteria, but the main people most know are the news anchors. So besides Heather and Melissa being featured, and from a writer's standpoint, trying to weave a story through a book, you need to have some characters who reemerge at different points. And then there were Marti, I felt, was significant as the first African-American news anchor. That Tara Brantley is has the most longevity of any African-American news anchor in the state of Indiana. And both of them were exemplary figures and well known in Fort Wayne for many years. Liz Berry was the first the second female to be a news anchor in Fort Wayne, the first on Wayne TV. She also was in the first Fox news station. They only had news for about 1 year before Steve Shine became the voice of their news. But when they went on the air, they had a news department, and she was just a kid reporter. Then she went to Wayne, worked her way up as an anchor there. Then she went to PBS and founded Healthline, that's still on PBS. And then after that, she went over to Channel 21 and did Docs on Call. And she had a great picture collection, so she was a logical person at home. The first female on television, we have a small section about her, but Susan Welday died early on when she was very young, so there isn't a full section on Susan. That other key figures were Don Chevrolet is an amazing story, and he had an incredible photo collection of clips with Mark Harmon when he was a kid starting out, doing his first episode on Policewoman. At one point, Don was doing 3 live shows a day on Channel 21. He was doing everything like that, and he had come off of WOWO. And also, interestingly, I think he's the only man alive who was, because he was just very young, at WNDU in South Bend, and he was an on-air announcer, but he was so into radio, he left WNDU and went to Fort Wayne to WOWO. So Don Chevrolet's in there. Dick Floria is a primary figure because he is kind of the epitome of the detailed guy. Well, double check that source, triple check that. Linda Jackson, who never rose to a #1 anchor, but is still one of the most beloved figures in our area, and her story about the circuses in Peru and how she was a circus girl, her twin brother getting killed young, and how it led to her drunk driving exposés or stories on 33 later on. In addition, the 2 sports people who are focused most on are Dean Pantazzi, who is the longest serving sports personality in the history of this, even more than Hilliard Gates, and Hilliard's all over the book, but then Hilliard Gates. And arguably the most long-lasting sports things are the Friday night football reports, where sports goes front and center and even bumps half the news out with this score. And when I asked Dean about that, he said, "Oh, I stole that from Randy Schiffman over at Wayne, which they did the highlight zone, which was actually the first in the country, and Rick Mole said he got the idea from another station, and he and Randy did it first. And then Dean said, we better get something here at 21, and they did the score. Curtis Smith, like he said, he'll be remembered as a weather guy no matter what he does the rest of his life, partly because of his beard. But and then the big 3 early on were Harry Gates, who was general manager of the first station and was known, although I find a lot of young people say, "Who's Hilliard Gates?" It's different today. And then Reed Chapman who was known as Chuckles in Indianapolis, and because Chuckles Candy sponsored his show, and his son is called Chuck Chapman by most people here in Fort Wayne today because of that Chuckles, because of the candy. But Reed came up and built the radio station Wayne and then the TV station, and he was the first to interject political coverage into this market. Steve Corona is highlighted. Steve, I believe, is the first Mexican-American news director in the country. Steve was shocked when I told him that, partly because, for a number of reasons, but we tried to check it. The reason I think that's true is because in baseball, when I was researching Hispanics in baseball, in South Texas and elsewhere, in places like San Antonio, where you'd think they'd have Hispanic broadcasters, the Anglos didn't want anything to do with having Mexican Americans in their high positions. They were pretty almost exclusively white on television, long past here. And Steve came in, and he knows he's the first one in the Midwest. So at some point, this is going to be picked up of Steve's role and prominence in the Hispanic community. He also was the first to bring on the political commentators, Phil Gutman and Ivan Levimoff, for election cycles. That was Steve when he was a news director at Wayne. So that's a sampling of the, and Ed Petcalf, because the WPTA, and Barb Wiggum, who, from what I could trace from the early people at WPTA, Ed kind of set the agenda in the early 70s. Barb Wiggum made it work, is a simple way to say it.
I find all this fascinating. Marty, when you were younger, what made you interested in the media? Who influenced you?
So, one of my mother's co-workers told me this had to be what, 40 years ago, because my mother retired. He told me that he remembered that when I would go to work with my mother, sometimes my mother was a defense contract administrator, and I would go to work with her sometimes on Saturdays, and apparently I told one of her co-workers that I was going to be a reporter and an anchor. When I was like, how old would I have been? 10, 12? I don't recall that, but I'm sure he's telling the truth. But you know, that love of reading and writing has always been there. Always. Influence. Who influenced me? Well, Barbara Walters. Oh. I mean, she was it. Barbara Walters. Gosh, so many. Well, you know, loved Mr. Cronkite, loved Huntley Brinkley, but I can't say that, but you know, if I told my mother's coworker that this was what I was going to do when I was 10 or 12, I must have been watching Mr. Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley and the rest of them. I don't know. I would just say that, I don't know who influenced me, but let me tell you who I loved along the way. Peter Jennings. Peter Jennings. He was it. And remember when they did that, what did they call that back in the day when it was Peter Jennings, Max Robinson, and Frank Reynolds? Oh, wow.
ABC World News Tonight.
ABC World News Tonight, but it was called something.
It was the only time they did a trio.
Right. They were fabulous.
There was World News Tonight from, I think, Washington, World News Tonight from New York, and
Chicago. I mean, that was powerful. Carol Simpson, and let me say her name correctly, Carol Simpson, who I believe is a professor at some East Coast college or university, but she was the first black female on ABC News, wasn't she, possibly?
She was one of the early ones.
Yeah, Carol Simpson. But yeah, you know, I would just have to defer back to Barbara Walters. I mean, that's who we saw, and in fact, I remember before I got into media, I was working at this job at an insurance agency in Fort Wayne, and I told the gentleman that I think I was going for an interview at WMEE. By the way, I was in radio for a year and a half, and I can tell you, I would have stayed in radio or gone into newspaper had it not been for the money. My goal was never to be on television. My goal was to write. And to me, again, the purest form of writing is newspaper, books, whatever. Yeah, I would say that those were the people that...
What I saw as a common denominator, and Marty's interview captures this clearly, and that is, depending on the age, how long ago it was that people came into television, and that their role models, there were no female role models for years. So almost every female I interviewed would use an example of somebody they saw as a breakthrough, but they didn't really have necessarily a thought that they were going to be a news anchor because there were no females. And Marty gives white examples because there really weren't black examples.
And that's why I was struggling, but there was no one.
But they overcame that partly because their parents instilled them the success, and then as they got older, they started to see some breakthroughs, which gave them some encouragement, but you still didn't necessarily think you were going to be an anchor. And that now the younger ones who came in by Melissa Long started to see more females by the time she was coming in, who was just after you, and then by the time Heather was there were female anchors were becoming more prominent, and African Americans, even in Fort Wayne, were starting their prominent. Steve Corona remains, I've asked this question, why aren't there more Hispanics? Because we have Hispanics are about half as many as African Americans in our district. Now part of it is there's lots of complicated reasons with this, but it's interesting. We've had more Asians break through. The first one was Mayan Cruzy. She married a Cruz. She was Vietnamese, and right afterwards, Jeanette Liu was the second. And Jeanette is probably the best known early on, but we've had a number of Asians, and we still do on local television, who have done well. But each of them look for models, and initially they may not have them when they're real young.
You know something? You are a pioneer, Marty.
Okay, and thank you, but that wasn't the purpose.
You are still a pioneer. Other people can say, you would not believe it, or just say, this is the way I'm going. But other people admire you, and they love you for what you have done and what you still do.
And I can say this, because I learned this in baseball too, about Jack Robinson and others. They know the people in charge of a highly public industry, that the first people out of the box better be really good and not be thinking of themselves in racial terms, or they'll be rejected. And Marty didn't think of herself that way and still doesn't. But the fact is, part of the reason Ed Metcalf put her up first when he was #1 in taking risk was he thought she was saleable because she didn't carry a chip on her shoulder about it. She just wanted to be a news person. The same thing with Steve Corona. It's like, was I the first Mexican American? I never thought of it that way. But that's partly why he got it, because he was, there isn't any way to say it. You have, you got to think in terms of the TV market, not Fort Wayne. The TV market is much bigger than the city of Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne's about 35% to 40% of the TV market. And that the white population numbers, even now with all the changes, probably about 85% of TV, or 80 in this market. But you don't have anymore 85% of the people on TV being white, but it is you still have to know where the market is if you're going to get the ratings, because it's a business. If they don't get the ratings, they don't get the advertising, and that's partly what's happening now. So that one other thing I just want to address along the same lines. If I heard once, I heard 100 times about and read in all kinds of critique articles that the people who are on TV are more attractive. And without a doubt, there are very few natural bonds and yet there are a ton of blondes on TV. But guess what? It's a video thing. People have to watch you in their living rooms, and they get the vote with their little clicker. And that if you don't want to be measured by how you look, how you present, whether you're enthusiastic, whether you smile, then go into radio or newspaper or some job where you aren't on video, because it's a different type of a thing. And not everybody has to be the same. You can make it if you're just kind of, just like in politics. Politics, people are generally taller, are generally not necessarily Dan Quayle good looking, but far better than me, and or wealthy. And guys like me just have to scrap to get into that, but we're rare. You look at most politicians and they're very polished looking. I walk into a room and I look like an accountant. And that it is a different type of thing, but I had to know that going into politics. And just like the people who go into television, you better be doggone good if you're going to be not one of the mainline things.
So I would get in trouble, but I stood by it and I still do. I would, the bias in television is just what Mark said. The bias is you gotta be half decent looking. I mean, it is the way it is. People will use that clicker. If they don't like what they see, they're turning away. I'm not trying to say that
you're good looking.
Right, I'm not trying to say that. But you know, I mean, look at Melissa, look at Heather, look at the people on TV, but that's a fact, but it still doesn't matter. It's the quality of what you are delivering to the citizens.
It can get you in the door, but if you don't know anything about the city of Fort Wayne and mispronounce everything, you won't last very long either.
Yeah, you can be Raquel Welch if you don't know what you're doing.
And she actually started on television doing the weather, which didn't work out real well.
Well, Patty, you've been kind of silent here for a while. Why don't you talk and then we'll wrap up. How you got started? You have a whole different path. You started late. You're on public access. What inspired you all of a sudden, or maybe it wasn't all of a sudden, to become a television producer host?
Well, I'm from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I did a little bit of camera work in Toronto itself many moons ago when I was in my 20s, 30s. And then when my husband and I, Bob and I, moved here to the United States 26 years ago. Anyways, we moved here to Fort Wayne 13 years ago. In 2010, I started as a camera person again here at Access Fort Wayne TV station, downtown Fort Wayne, Indiana. Then Bob Erie, who was one of the main honchos underneath the manager, he got me interested in being a TV producer, and he mentored me, and then I became, well, mini star, whatever you have to call it, but I don't see it like that. I just see myself working. We didn't get paid. We don't get paid for what we're doing, but my payment is getting to know a lot of people and becoming more learning more about society and the world and what's going on, and I learned, and I'm still learning, and I'm still interviewing people. I'm going in my 12th year now.
She doesn't say, eh?
Eh?
Oh, okay.
That's okay, eh? And you got me started.
Well, what's amazing to me is that people often start something and then it just fizzles out for whatever reason. Life gets in the way, they get married, they move away, they get another interest. You have done Patty's Page every week, and I've known you, I think now, what, 11 years? Every week without fail. I mean, sometimes you do 3 in a week, sometimes you won't do any for a couple months, but you have a show every week, a new show. And that's truly amazing. And they're high quality, they aren't just thrown together. And she has a lot of nerve, you know. She's had Patty Duke on her show. I say, Patty, how do you get these people?
Go to their
I
website.
take a deep breath, I look them up on Google and call them up.
I go to to the website, contact, and I've interviewed singers like McGovern, what's her name? Maureen McGovern several times, and all those people, artists, pagers, dancers, as well as political, and everything, really.
And I think that it's also important to say that when you get into this business, you really are throwing yourself out there.
Yeah.
No one made phone calls for me to set up interviews. I did that. No one did my hair and makeup. I did it. And boy, was that hard for an African American back in the 80s when there was no one to do your hair and makeup.
You wore makeup? I didn't. I never had.
Well,
on my shows.
so I guess the point is, and I like that point, you just pick up the phone and you call.
Right.
You just knock on the door. You just, and you have to have, if I would say anything about me, it was scary because I didn't know what I was doing, okay? I did not know what I was doing. But then you just go do it. You just do it. And then you figure out what works and what doesn't. And then people see you out enough that they get to know you, good or bad, you know? Is Marty banging on my door for? You know, or whatever. But you have to do it to get the job done.
I have also done my shows when I was ill, or just after an operation on my shoulder or whatever. I went through it, Terry knows. He was my co-host for about 5-6 years, around there, you know. Anyway, he still is my co-host. But I'm saying, through wind, rain, snow, whatever, I did it. And so did you.
And that's what you do. So when Patty said to me, what did you say to me? Were you a reporter? I'm still a reporter.
Yeah.
And I've been out of it for 20 years. I'm still a reporter. It was my career, it was my job, and it honestly is a, what's the word I want? A calling, a purpose,
Mission.
A mission, sure. And I think that's what makes you successful. If I was successful, it was because of that. You never give up, you never stop, you smile through the tears, you work even if you're not getting paid, right? Because you love it.
I'm driven. I'm driven to do what I'm doing.
There you go. There you go.
Well,
I
you
also
three have
wanted
all
to-
been so enlightening and inspiring, really, and so honest, and not taking yourself all that seriously. I mean, Mark says he looks like an accountant. Not too many guys in Congress would say that, and I don't think that's true, actually, but if that's what you think.
I'm an accountant. But Martin Lowell one time said, I can put on 25 pounds just by going this, like this. And television really does that. That's why they stress so much about losing weight, even if you're a congressman, because you're in media all the time.
They gained 10 pounds on the TV, eh?
Yeah.
So,
And you know, can I tell one makeup story?
Well, absolutely.
I have it in
Yeah,
the
wrap up with
in
the story,
in the
however you
book,
want.
because one of the definitive moments was the Nixon-Kennedy debates of television, and that set up then the assassination, where so many of us watched for days. Live television changed news forever after 1963. Then the space program was going on at the same time, which there's some fascinating stories about that. But on Fox News one time, they were prepared, whenever you go on one of the national network shows on Crossfire or Fox and Fox and Friends on, they put pretty heavy makeup on. You can always tell who's been on TV if you have to run over for a vote because they have makeup on. They don't look like a normal person, that heavy makeup. And that, because the camera lights are so strong and hot, I was getting in the back room at Fox, and this lady was putting makeup on, and she was a little bit older. Now I'm old, so I have to be careful about that. But she was old enough to still be working, but she seemed pretty old to be working at Fox News. And she's putting the final touches on my makeup, and she said, you know, I did Richard Nixon's makeup before that big debate with John Kennedy. And I'm thinking, why are you telling me this? Like that I have too many whiskers on, that I look ill because he was ill before the debate? You know, are you trying to panic me? Are you a secret Democrat trying to undermine me before I go on TV? I never did figure out, other than she was still proud that she did the makeup for Nixon in the Nixon Kennedy debate. But it unnerved me at the time.
That's a good story.
I've had other people interview me, but I'm a lousy interviewee. I interview better than I be behind asking me questions.
So if the purpose of being a journalist is to have your face on television, I mean, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay, that's fine. But in the purest sense of the word, or the purest sense of, in my opinion, of the career, television wasn't the end-all be-all. I just wanted to read and write. That's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's it.
God puts us where we're supposed to be.
It's true, too.
True, true. So we are going to wrap this up. Any last words? Any last words? Any last? Oh, I'm going
Hard to
to just
top
wrap
that
that.
story, Mark. You got anything to add?
I'd just like to thank Mark for writing this book. I mean, there's truly no words, even if I wasn't in the book. It's such a wonderful, wonderful publication, very important. I think that anybody, you don't have to be in broadcasting to want this book. And
It's history.
It's history. It's history.
It's history and it's stories. And it's stories of human beings who worked in television, but they could have been accountants, they could have been anything else, because the story is what comes through in your book, Mark.
Yes.
And I also want to thank Melissa and Heather, because they sat through hours of discussion as things were coming in, trying to help organize it, help open doors. And Heather in particular did a lot of proofreading. She's very particular, and I'm sometimes not quite as particular, and that was very helpful in the process. And like I said in the book and here, Bill Nichols was just tremendous. I did not know what a great storyteller he'd be. The stories of Dick the Bruiser on live television at the studio at WKG are worth the price of admission. He had stuff in there on Wayne Rothkev with Jay Gould telling him as a young guy when he was down in Jay County, basically he was going to make him not masculine if he came into the Fort Wayne market. Came from unpublished memoirs that Bill had access to, that he has just a boatload of stories that have never been heard before. How Alex Azar shared how the bite, Bill Foster's bite of a hamburger, is what built Azar's. He was going to go out of business until that bite occurred, and built the huge chain. And so the people who added the stories, each in their own way, including Marty, but I also want to pay special thanks to our co-editors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The books are over there if you want to take a gander at them. Over in here, they're autographed if you wish. You buy one. So there you go. This is Patty Hunter, and this is Marti Wright, and this is Mark Souder. Sorry. Anyways, me, Patty Hunter. Thank you for being on our show, and thank you, audience, for coming to watch us and listen to the history of your TV here in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Yeah, I just want to say in closing, I kind of expected a book that would be dry, you know, television, kind of an academic review of Fort Wayne. Instead, you had all these stories popping in. And it started reading more like a novel almost than a dry history book. And Mark said in the show with Patty, you didn't like the word history in the title, like not history of Fort Wayne. I think maybe I called it that, you know, not history. Television in Fort Wayne. Because history can be dry. This book is not dry. It's very colorful. It brings these people to life. So thank you for a wonderful book, Mark Souder. Thank you, Marti Wright.
Thank you.